Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Abby Stone, and I'm the executive editor at Well+Good. And I'll be leading this conversation tonight about mental health in pandemic times. Feels very timely. Before we launch in, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items and ground rules. So everyone tuning in knows we'll plan on having a conversation for about 45 minutes. And then if time allows, opening it up for questions from all of you after that. So if you'd like to ask a question, please drop it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, the icon with the two little chat bubbles. And then also on that note, I'd like to encourage everyone to use the chat function during this conversation if they'd like to. If something really resonates with you, if you'd like to add something, please put it into the chat. The note is we need to keep things of utmost respect. If there's any hateful, harmful, or racist comments, you will be immediately booted from this Zoom call. All righty. So I'm going to start with some statistics because who doesn't love a good data point? A June survey by the CDC puts the percentage of American adults struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues at 40%. A separate study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in September found that rates of symptoms associated with depression are 3 times higher during the COVID-19 pandemic than they were before. These numbers are shockingly high, but they're also not all that surprising. I bet that even if you didn't know the statistics, you knew that the state of mental health in America right now was shaky at best. If in the past 7 months, you've stopped yourself from starting a conversation with, "How are you?" because that question now feels absurdly out of touch, then you get it. Because something pretty remarkable has happened in the past year. As mental health has collectively deteriorated, we've also seen an increase in awareness for, acceptance of, and support for mental health issues. And that's really what we're going to dig into this evening. How has the pandemic impacted our mental health? But also, have we reached a turning point in our efforts to erase the stigma that surrounds mental health conditions? And joining me tonight, I have our 3 brilliant panelists who I'm going to introduce for everyone now. First, Jasmine Marie is a breathwork practitioner and founder of Black Girls Breathing, an organization committed to making breathwork accessible to Black women across the globe. Her work centers around wellness practices that are accessible and relevant, from underserved minority communities to stressed out college students and executives. Just last week, Black Girls Breathing launched its reallocation initiative, which set a fundraising goal of $100,000 by the end of 2020 in order to provide free access to its digital breathwork circles for 1 year. Next, we have Amanda White. Amanda E. White is a licensed therapist and the creator of a popular Instagram account, Therapy for Women, and founder of Therapy for Women Center in Philadelphia. She specializes in teaching women how to set boundaries, engage in real self-care, and work through shame. She is in recovery from an addiction and eating disorder, and in her clinical work specializes in supporting clients in the overlap and intersection of both. Keep an eye out for her forthcoming book, Not Drinking Tonight, A Therapist's Guide to Creating a Sober Life You Love. And last but definitely not least, we have Elise Fox. Elise is a filmmaker, activist, and founder of Sad Girls Club, a nonprofit 501c3 organization committed to showing up for people of color through creating accessible resources, building community, and sparking conversation that benefits mental wellness. To further her impact, Elise currently serves as a board member on Selena Gomez's Rare Beauty Council, an organization committed to raising $100 million towards mental health resources for marginalized communities. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi.
Hi. For having us.
Amazing. So to start us off, I want to talk a bit about the impact of the pandemic on Americans' mental health. So at the top, I obviously listed some statistics, but I'd love for each of you to speak to what you've seen in your work over the past 6 months or so. What are some of the most common challenges that you are seeing with the people that you work with in your communities? And just in general, has there been an uptick in people seeking support? Jasmine Marie, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say in my work, I serve mostly Black women. And since the pandemic, once we surveyed 100 plus participants, we definitely have seen that, yes, while some of them have lost their job, a large majority of our community has kept their health insurance. However, I think the stat was 90% of our community still has health insurance, but only 28% of them have access to consistent mental health care. And for us, what that's saying is, okay, we know that deductibles are too high, out of network costs, to where our community is not feeling like, yes, they have insurance, but they're not getting the support that they need. That, along with losing jobs, a lot of grief from our community with lost loved ones, having to caretake elder parents, along with taking care of children, homeschooling, all of this has impacted their mental health. And so, of course, we know that services like ours are even more important, and making sure that it feels accessible as well. So that's a bit of what I'm seeing in my community, and just it further reinforces why our work is so important.
Absolutely. Elise, what have you been seeing?
I think that a lot of the feedback I received from our community is that girls are just really feeling like alone. Like there was no transition to even like say goodbye to your classmates or your friends. It was a very abrupt cutoff, and a lot of our community we're trying to find spaces and places and try to basically imitate the same feelings they would get like from receiving a hug from a friend, or just having real conversations in that way. So we really had to take a step back and like sit and see what other platforms were doing, because I feel like this was a really good time to try things out and be a little bit like scrappy and really listen to the community and see what they want. So we were able to launch our first like one-on or group therapy initiative this summer, and we're just really trying to service the community in a time that is so uncertain. And I think that a lot of the toxic positivity, people are kind of over that. So we're really trying to just shift and see how we can communicate more effectively. And I just want to be there to support like everyone who's feeling alone at this time.
For sure. And you mentioned loneliness. Amanda, I know loneliness is something that we've spoken a bit about. Can you talk to the impact you've seen of loneliness on the people that you work with?
Absolutely. I think loneliness is something that we all experience on some level, but just with coronavirus and everything that's going on. I mean, I work with a lot of young women. I live in Philadelphia and I serve primarily women in Philadelphia. And, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people live alone, didn't see parents or, family for a really long time, and just that isolation. And really, we need more than just I think sometimes there's a misconception that loneliness is filled with an intimate partner, and we actually need different levels of groups in our life to be able to not feel lonely. We need a group beyond like an intimate relationship, and an intimate relationship could also be family or something like that. We also need a community. And I think that, Zoom is great, doing stuff like that is awesome, but it doesn't fulfill us in quite the same way that our normal lives do.
It's very true. We don't, we're used to having different touch points throughout the day. So you see your coworkers at work, you maybe see your friends after work, you have your significant other if you have one at home. But now that's all flattened, right? So we're trying to cope with this new reality. And Amanda, something that you and I also spoke with previously that I thought was just fascinating is the fact that our brains also aren't wired to handle the level of connection that the pandemic is making us open to, the level of digital connection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's interesting, right? Because on one level, we're more isolated than ever in terms of physical proximity to each other and physical connection that we normally have. But on the other side, we are more connected to people through the internet than we ever have been before. We're connected now to billions of people on the internet. And it's really interesting in terms of like evolutionary psychology, our brains are only wired to actually be connected to 150 people maximum. That's the way that there's like brain size, the bigger your brain, the more people you can like be connected to. And we as humans have the largest brains in terms of that type of connection. So it's just, I think, creating a whole new a whole new wave of kind of also, how do we deal with this constantly being on? How do we recharge? How do we take care of ourselves and not compare ourselves to everyone on the internet, when that's the only source of connection we really feel like we may have access to?
Absolutely. But the internet, I think it's really a double-edged sword, right? Because it's creating this always on feeling that, you know, the doom scrolling, reading the news all the time, that can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. But at the same time, I feel like especially on social media, we're seeing kind of this support for one another of grow as well. And as I touched on in my intro, you know, there's this growing awareness that we're not alone with the mental health struggles that we have. You know, I don't start any of my emails anymore. I hope this email finds you well, because like, who's well feels like a very silly thing to do. So this to me signals that there's some progress that's happening in breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health that have been prevalent forever, really. And that's something I'd love to dig into a bit deeper. Elise, I know you've spoken before about how the stigma surrounding mental health, particularly for Black women, is one of the reasons that you started Sad Girls Club in the first place. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether we're making progress in terms of erasing this stigma.
Yes, I absolutely feel like we're making progress. Like myself and Jasmine and Amanda, like Jasmine specifically is creating community specifically for Black women. And when I started Sad Girls Club in 2016, I like lurked to like find something that resonated with me. And I found a couple of like posts and pages, but there wasn't anything that was dedicated. And I feel like Black women are usually the end of the totem pole. And I feel like we needed something that was special, something that was unique, something that, you know, straightforward, like this is for women of color, this is for Black women, this is a safe space for you. And I think that's what resonated so well with the community that was built. And I've seen just throughout the past 3 years, like there have been so many like Black Girl Magic, there's so many pages that are just kind of providing spaces in niche communities. Like if you want to learn breath work, you can join Jasmine's community. If you like, kind of just want to learn about your overall mental health, you can join Sad Girls Club. And it's so cool to have these spaces finally exist and to be very vocal about like we're taking up space, this is our space, and to have that kind of that specialness. And that's something that's been missing, but I'm so happy and I'm so proud of like all of the women who are building these platforms out.
Amazing. Jasmine Marie, you are, you know, similar kind of philosophy in creating a space where breath work is accessible to more people. How do you feel we're doing on our, you know, towards our goal of breaking mental health stigma?
I'm echoing what Elise said. I think that the awareness of saying I'm not okay and I don't have to take on what may have been taught by family, in that, you know, oh, you don't address mental health, you pray about it, that's weird. You need to be strong enough to press through the whole archetype of the strong Black woman. I believe that there are more Black women and people in general who are waking up, especially within marginalized communities where there are certain stigmas around taking care of your mental health. People are waking up, becoming aware, and then seeking the tools that resonate with them. I think that's the beautiful thing, is that breath work may not be what you like, you know, you may not resonate with it, but there are different communities that are starting to serve the people that need this work the most. So I'm excited to see what, you know, comes of this. It's been a hard time. Yes, the pandemic really has been hard, especially for the communities that this pandemic has impacted the most. But I do see the solutions, and I'm excited to see what comes from that.
Absolutely. Elise, you brought up the term toxic positivity, and that I think is so key to, you know, understanding that term and where it comes from and why we need to get rid of it is so important when it comes to normalizing mental health issues. Amanda, do you want to give us a definition of toxic positivity?
Absolutely. So toxic positivity is essentially the phenomenon where we only really accept positivity and positive emotions as something that's acceptable. So that looks often like kind of the good vibes only. It looks like shoving down any type of negative feeling or negative emotion we have. And in terms of what it looks like, it shows up with people is if we cry in front of someone, show emotion that isn't positive, people feel uncomfortable, they don't like it, they may try to tell you just be grateful for what you have, and it just kind of washes over and negates, you know, any how you're feeling.
So with that in mind, what can we do? What can you all do as leaders of communities, and what can, you know, the rest of us do as well in terms of normalizing feelings and making these conversations more prevalent? Anyone who wants to go? Yeah.
Okay. I'll hop in. I mean, I think doing stuff like this is a really great thing to start with, of just being honest. Like you said, Abby, I think people are starting to at least acknowledge that we're not okay. I think, you know, media recognition of this is really important. But I also think it just goes into just the way that we show up with our families, with our friends. A lot of times the toxic positivity can grab hold in communities based on what you know, what we feel like is acceptable and how we feel. So a lot of times it shows up if we have beliefs that it's not okay to be upset, it's not okay to show emotions, and that can spread in a negative way, where if I, you know, won't show that I'm upset about something, then friends, family don't, and it can spread that way. So I think modeling is also important.
Oh, go ahead, Elise.
I was just saying, like, we encourage people to feel feelings. Like, you have to experience anger. You have to experience grief. Like, not, you don't have to experience grief, but you have to experience all the emotions that are underneath that emotion to even heal. So we can't just put on this mask. And I felt like for a long time, it was just like, let's just say positive things and people will, you know, repost it and I'm going to spread the message of goodness. And that's amazing. But like, we're in a state now where it's like, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening in the next month. And it's okay to have these emotions. It's okay to talk about them. So we really encourage our community to have these real conversations and speak about all the nitty gritty nuances of their mental health.
Absolutely. And the modeling idea, I think, is so important as well. I know, Jasmine Marie, that's something we spoke about a bit. You know, the practitioners, the leaders, being open about their feelings as well.
Yeah, I lead pretty much very transparent and vulnerable in our community. They know, and I think that gives people a permission, in a sense, that okay, like she does this work in her day to day, and she's saying that I've dealt with feelings of anxiety, I dealt with, you know, feeling a depressive bout, and normalizing those experiences. I'm really big on saying, like, I don't like to charge emotions. It's just the human experience, right? Like, I don't, you know, sadness or anger isn't negative. It's just, hey, that's an indication what's happening. You know, what do I need to pay attention to? What do I need to give myself compassion on? So I think that's something that's been really big. A big theme in our community is even the guilt and being able to experience more than one emotion at one time, right? You're looking around and maybe you have close people who lost someone, but something good happens to you and you're like, I don't know what to do with this because it's a whole pandemic, and, you know, all allowing and being a model for the my community. And it's okay to experience more than one thing. We're not a monolith. You can hold equal, you know, emotions. You can be grateful you have a job, but also understand that it's taxing you at this time, and just continuing to talk and speak in that way to open the door for, like, okay, if she's saying it, then I know, giving myself permission that, okay, nothing's wrong with me if I'm experiencing this as well.
I think that's a great point that you brought up as well, that you might feel like you can't experience joy in this time because other people, you know, are experiencing so much loss and grief. And I think on the flip side of that, something that happens is, you know, if you do feel like you are coming from a place of privilege, you have your job, you have your health, your loved ones are health, you might also feel like, I don't deserve to be depressed right now, or I don't deserve to be anxious right now because some people have it so much worse than I do. And I'd love your thoughts on how do you, is there a way for people to break through that kind of like comparing mindset in order to really feel the feelings that they have? Jasmine Marie?
I always say, like, if you're not going to do the whole comparison in the good way, then don't do it. Like, hold things equally, right? If you wouldn't compare because like, oh, they have this and this, and I shouldn't compare myself because, like that's their life. Do the same thing here. Like hold it equally and allow yourself to, like, this isn't a competition on how bad we can all feel and who's a winner in that. And so, I mean, and I get it. It's very natural for us for that pattern and what's the word for it? That oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But the belief system that we have to, we can't acknowledge what's going on in our life because someone has it worse. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, that's their lesson. And you and your experience have your own lessons and journey to go through. So honor your experience and, you can always have compassion for others, but that doesn't mean you have to neglect what you're going through because that does no one good, right? Like you still feel this way. Looking at their situation isn't going to change you feeling this way.
Absolutely. And I always feel like if you have your tribe, like I always say, it's so important for your mental health to have your tribe, people you can just go to and dish and indulge, whether it's positive or negative. If that's your real tribe, they will be happy for you in this time. Obviously, if they're experiencing loss and grief, like you can have that compassion, you can have the conversation too, but there's a way and a cadence that you can have a celebration of your accomplishments, whether it's like celebrate for yourself, but also if you want to share news with a friend, if they're part of your tribe and your close circle, then they should be happy for you, and that should kind of brighten up their day a little bit to see you kind of progress in the way that you've been working towards as well.
Yeah, and I think also just, right, if we talk about from like a brain perspective, like your brain doesn't really care whether someone has it better than you or worse than you. Like you're going to have emotions, they're going to come up, they're a function, they're trying to tell you something. And while logically we can think about how we like should or shouldn't feel this way, like emotions are data, emotions are information, and they're not always rational. And one of the big things that I talk about in my work with people is like giving up the idea that you're going to be able to figure out exactly how you should feel. You can feel more than one way at the same time, and your emotions may not always make sense. And that's okay. As long as you can feel them and work through them, that's the most important thing, because we're not meant to just, one of my big pet peeves, I think, is like people saying that like your natural state is happiness. And that's just not true. We're meant to feel all different types of ways, depending on what's going on.
For sure. And I think when I think about stigma as well, and when I think about normalizing feelings like we were just discussing, I think there's a tendency for people, it's easier to offer support to someone else sometimes than it is to open up about your own struggles. So it feels like you're busting stigma because you're out there saying, I don't judge you, I want to help you, I want to give you whatever you need. But that doesn't always translate into you being open yourself. And if you're not open about the way that you're feeling, to your point, Amanda, about being honest about your feelings, how you can't really get the support that you need as well. So I'd love to hear from each of you if you have advice to people who maybe are afraid about opening up about their mental health, but really want to for the first time. And then also, on that note, how do you check in with your feelings? Amanda, you were saying that you might not know exactly what they are, but like, how do you start to pinpoint the way that your body is reacting or your mental health is reacting to everything that's happening around you?
I think one of the first things you can do if you're someone who does, and people do struggle to identify how they're feeling, is to start actually getting curious about your body sensations. And Jasmine Marie can probably kind of talk about this with breath work and stuff like that. But most of our emotional states actually have distinct body sensations that come with them, and then those follow into thoughts. So really, it's really interesting. They've done studies, and actually the more specific you can identify how you're feeling, it's called emotional granularity. The more specific you can identify, I feel frightened versus I feel, scared, for example, or I feel frustrated versus feeling angry, the better you're going to actually be able to take care of yourself. Because if you think about kids, they only know a few words. So if you only know the words happy, sad, and angry, you're going to be happy, sad, or angry a third of the time. So the more breadth we can get of really identifying how we feel in our body, identifying the words, the better we're going to be able to take care of ourselves. So that's one of the first things I would recommend people play with and start trying to do.
Jasmine Marie, I know somatic healing is such a core part of what you do. Can you, I guess, as you're answering this other question, I keep throwing questions at you, kind of give a definition for what somatic healing is and how you incorporate your body in evaluating your feelings?
Yeah, so somatic healing plainly means healing of the body, and there's multiple body work tools you can use. Breathwork is one of them. You can do more physical sensation, even massaging, getting it's not chiropractic. What is the word? I'm like drawing a blank.
The chiropractor?
Yes, but what's the verb of getting?
God, I
Is
don't
there
know.
like a verb of
I don't know.
Getting all the way into even getting massages. I mean, there's been times someone can get a massage and you immediately start crying because there are different trigger points in your body where you've been storing energy or, trauma, because trauma lives in the body and not the mind. It's so great to hear Amanda say that. I love when therapists are like, yeah. I would recommend going off of Amanda's point. Sometimes it can feel very overwhelming to get to know your body, but, taking a moment, maybe when you see that you're okay, do a check-in, a 5-sense check-in, or like, oh, or take a particular body part, right? My face, okay, are my teeth clenched right now? Okay, maybe my jaw is tight, like what's happening? And just little by little, it's a practice and you get to learn and tap into your body more, and to the point of how to share, your mental health challenges with other people. I always say that you need to find the spaces you can be truly vulnerable with, because not every space is safe to be vulnerable. And if you go into a space that's not safe for you to share this and it backfires, that further ingrains in your mind that I can't share this information. People will look at me, one way. So identifying the spaces that, okay, I have some data and evidence that this person will be able to support me in this way if I open up this information, or if I have access to a mental health care practitioner opening up in this way, and they can help me further identify spaces that would nurture me being upfront and honest. I would say start there, because there are times when spaces are not safe, and that further ingrains in a person that they shouldn't have shared in the first place. So I would start there as well. Identify the spaces you feel and have evidence that you can be truly vulnerable in.
Fantastic. And you and Elise have both really built these spaces for people to be able to feel vulnerable as well. Elise, can you speak a little bit to, how does someone identify what might be a safe space for them? And then if you have thoughts on my previous question about advice for people opening up about their mental health for the first time, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So I would say for opening up about your mental health for the first time, and I really try to speak to a younger audience, because I always feel like the same way on what Amanda said, if you don't have the language to speak about what you're feeling, how can you describe it to anyone? How can you share this information? So I'm really big on educating a younger generation, the Gen Zs and even younger, to kind of just remove the stigma. But for me, what personally has worked is my art. Not everyone can speak about their feelings. It's so nerve-wracking. And when I first started Sad Girls Club, I was a mess. I could barely even speak a sentence. And what helped me was just telling my story through film. I have girls who journal, and that's the way that they speak about their emotions or just purge what they're feeling and kind of get a sense of what's going on in their head. And then from there, it's oh, okay, you can reflect and then have the conversation. So I'm really big on using your art or whatever your medium is, your craft, whether it's breathwork, like whatever it is, for you to just do some inward thinking and healing, and then take that information when you can kind of put it better into words or write a letter to whomever you want to speak with, and using a medium that works best for you, because not everyone can just, you know, speak to their emotions. And to find a community that resonates with you, I feel like we live in a really cool time now where there's a lot out there, which is good and bad, but there's so many ways to find these communities. And the one thing I really like about Instagram is that if I'm on Sad Girls Club, I can click that little arrow and it'll show me like-minded pages, and I'll just go on a frenzy and I'll like follow all of them. And a lot of girls follow us from their Finsta account, just so, you know, their likes and stuff don't show up. But it's cool to see that people can have like a whole separate like healing center or a whole separate tribe within their social media pages. And I think just if a page resonates with you, if the information speaks to you, if the faces on the pages, you see yourself reflected in them, that's something that's really huge for us, just making sure we show every color of the rainbow on our page, so every girl feels like they're being seen and shown. If something makes you feel bad or question yourself or question your body image, or, you know, make you feel worse, then that page probably isn't for you, no matter how many followers it has. Like, just move it along. It's okay. And also curating your own social media following to I guess if you can't unfollow people, just mute them, just so you aren't triggered. Or if you're going through a time and you can't see a beach body right now, or you don't even want to look at food or anything, like just mute people, and it's protecting your mental health at the end of the day. You wouldn't speak to someone every day who makes you feel badly, so why would you follow them, you know?
Absolutely. I think those are such important tools to knowing how to, you know, not only find a safe space externally, but kind of create a safe space for yourself, like within your devices as well, so that you're not continuously making things more difficult for yourself. I'd like to bring this back to the question of access. It's something that's come up quite a bit already throughout this discussion. And, you know, the first step is identifying for yourself that you might need help and you need to reach out. And then the next step is actually finding support services that work for you. Because to your point, Elise, there's not a one size fits all for this. And you do have to kind of find your individual tools. So first, I'd like to kick this over to Amanda as a therapist. What do you think that mental health services and professionals can do to better reach people where they are, so that they're more easily found, they feel more approachable, and yeah, to take kind of the onus off of the individual to do so much work to find someone? What can mental health providers do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am really a huge proponent of kind of like therapists and mental health providers reaching people where they are. So that's why I started my Instagram a few years ago. I know firsthand how hard it is to find a therapist that you resonate with. And I think a lot of the directories out there are difficult in that they're so huge, and you don't get a lot of information from someone where you really get a lot more of an understanding of, you know, a provider's, you know, personal beliefs, professional beliefs, what they stand for, what they're about. So I'm a really big proponent of having of providers like investing in like social media, Instagram, blogging, doing different things where, I mean, that's where people are. And that's really, there was pushback a few years ago when therapists kind of were going on social media and stuff like that. But really, I see it as people are spending so much time on this. So why wouldn't professionals come on and be able to be of support and provide resources where people are spending a lot of their time?
And it can be really difficult to find a therapist that you gel with too, right? It's not as easy as just like looking someone up online and then, oh, we're a perfect fit. So, you know, by seeing someone on Instagram or on YouTube, you might, or on TikTok, Gen Z, I'm ancient, you might get a better sense of someone's personality as well.
Absolutely. And especially, I mean, I'm a really big proponent too of, I share like tips a lot of times on my Instagram of like, you know, finding a therapist and stuff like that. I'm a really big believer in like, your therapist works for you. So like, it may be that you have to kind of like interview a few therapists before you meet them in person. It may be that you look up what they're, on their blog and you cross-reference things. It's kind of like the first time you meet them, if it's not a good fit, don't come back. You have a right to ask questions, to ask what their beliefs are on specific things, especially if they impact you. And I'm really a big believer in kind of the new wave of therapy of, that therapists don't need to be just blank slates, and like actually the therapist's personality matters because it affects whether you're going to feel safe with them or not, because we can't just say I'm a safe space. Things are safe for different people and we need to respect that.
That's a great point. So when you think about accessing mental health support and you think about barriers that prevent people from getting the help that they need, Jasmine Marie, you mentioned at the top, cost is obviously a huge one. Can you speak a little bit more about that and how Black Girls Breathing and other organizations are really doing the work to make mental health services more affordable for people?
Yeah, to Amanda's point, like of finding the right therapist, right, that cares about or can make space for your very specific issues. When you take a Black woman and her unique experience as a woman, being Black, and you tie that into I'm trying to find a therapist. So when we talk to our participants and they're saying, well, I do have health insurance, but out of network costs, deductibles, that gets in the way of traditional mental health care. I think, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be more reform around traditional mental health services and how people are able to access them. I think where spaces like Sad Girls Club and Black Girls Breathing are filling a gap is in the ability to be accessible by, like we have 150 free slots per session that women can access. And then even to opt in at a lower rate, they're $5 to $25 to come and join. And for 90 minutes, you can, feel like you're seen and heard, and, the specific issues that may have been coming up for you are acknowledged. And we've been coupling that lately, especially since COVID, with our community therapists that will couple traditional talk therapy with somatic healing with the breath work. And that's really been so impactful. And to me, I'm just like, I'm grateful that our space exists, but it's scary when we get survey data and we're like, how many participants said that we're their only resource for consistent mental health care? That's scary to me. I just like, there needs to be more. So, breaking down those barriers and being able to, my background is business, so I am able to think about this from a business perspective, like, okay, we have an accessible model, but how do we also sustain our efforts, pay our team? So I'm thinking beyond just, yes, provide it to the community, but also ensuring that those who work for us aren't having to pay rent and breath work. So I don't know how that even works, right? So I think it's twofold, and it presents an opportunity for growth. I would love in the next 10 years for, I think a barrier for a lot of therapists is that they can only practice in their state, even if it's, it's virtual. You can only see participants from your state. Meanwhile, I'm doing breath work and we have people who are joining from London or Bangkok, and it's just like, it's open and accessible. So I think, federal state regulations get in the way of meeting people where they are. And I hope for therapists as well that, there can be reform so we can get people the better help that they need.
That's such a great point. As things are increasingly going virtual and going digital, there's the potential for a wider reach, but the regulations have to match it, because if not, you're still cutting people off. So I think that's such a key point. And, a great reminder to keep advocating for change as much as possible. Elise, do you want to speak a little bit to other barriers to mental health support that you're seeing?
I do definitely think that the cost of therapy is something that is just so inaccessible to so many people. Like I find myself at times like, oh wait, let me just make sure I have enough to go to therapy this month. You know what I mean? And I can only imagine how much how heavy that weight is for like a 12-year-old girl, a 10-year-old girl. So similar to what Jasmine Marie said, we're building out these platforms, but we also need the support from communities who it resonates with, or communities in general, to support these platforms in order for us to keep going and sustain the communities that we're building. And I speak about this all the time. It's like, if you're a company that wants to work with SAG Girls Club or any other organization, like, please put money and funding behind these organizations. So next year, you know, we can collaborate again, but, you know, our reach will be a lot larger. So I'm big on just saying, like, you have to open up your wallets in order for us to heal as a generation, as a community, as a country. So, and I think that, you know, in a lot of fields, you have to test the model and then see if it works, and then you get funding. But in this like Instagram world, we're testing out models, and it's like, it's damn sure working. Like, you're reaching people in London, we're reaching people in Spain and different countries. So it's like, we need to support communities similar to ours in order for us to be a resource in the next 10 years. I don't want any of these platforms to not be in existence because, you know, we couldn't keep our lights on. But that's part of the accessibility, because we have to have that accessibility in order to create these communities. And yeah, that's a huge thing that we've been hearing from our girls. We launched Soul Sessions in July, and we've served about 1,000 girls since then. And a lot of them, it was their first time going to therapy, and this is the only platform that they have to go to therapy. And sometimes it's only once a month due to the demand. And like, it breaks my heart, but I'm also like, you know, how can we make this a little bit better? How can we make it more intimate? And that just comes from funding and support, to be honest. Like, I feel like we've worked out the model. We you know, obviously there are ways to improve, but we have to just support these. We have to support the people who are supporting us.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some comments about looking for ways to support all of you in particular. So there will be a post-event email sent around with everyone's contact information. But Jasmine Marie, Elise, Amanda, if you want to drop your social media channels in the chat now for people who are looking for it, I think that would be an awesome thing to do. And then kind of the last question until we go to audience questions, because there are a few, is, you know, considering, as we've just discussed, therapy isn't the only solution, and in many ways isn't a possible solution for some people. What are some things that you've learned, some tools that you use personally when you're having a low moment or struggling with your mental health? I'd love to just kind of provide some inspiration of other tools that people could use by hearing about, if you don't mind, your own personal practices. Amanda, you want to start?
Sure. I really love to stretch. I just find it something that I can do in my body that's quick, that's easy, it's accessible. Often in between like clients and stuff like that, I feel like the energy kind of builds up, and it's something that you can do for a little bit or you can do for longer. And I just find creating space in your body, for me, really makes a big difference. And it's, when you do something physical, it kind of like gives you a space to be able to notice your thoughts and be a little less attached to your thoughts.
I love that. Jasmine Marie?
I think great examples of relieving stress or frustration are children. And your body also naturally will do things like, if something's frustrating, you make an audible sigh. So we incorporate some of those, like, you know, very auditory ways of releasing energy, releasing, you know, getting in your body. I love to yell, screaming into pillows, stomping around. I mean, it feels like, what do children do? It feels good. And also just giving myself what I need in the moment. Sometimes that's crying, sometimes that's a walk, sometimes it's breath work, sometimes it's drinking coffee and staring out the window. Sometimes it's being like, it's okay to, you know, feel this way. And sometimes it's good escapism, right? Like, if we're always around, you know, in our work as practitioners, it's very heavy. Turn on the Netflix for a day. You know, it's okay to check. If your world feels super heavy and it's hard, grieving times, allow yourself to check out. You don't always have to stay in your body sometimes in that moment. Good escapism. I think it's good escapism is beneficial. So I would give those tips. Listen to yourself. What do you need? What are your go-tos? and trust yourself. Everyone is different. So what works for me may not work for you, but the goal is for you to be like, what does my body need? And for you to answer that for yourself.
And getting out of your head and into your body, it sounds like too, which is Amanda's stretching as well, just that a bit. Elise, what about you?
I love to like cancel plans, especially if I feel an ounce, like a little drip of I do not want to go or I won't be here too long. And it's been easier to do, obviously, because of the pandemic. I also have a 1-year-old son who keeps me very busy, and like, I don't know, just hanging out with him and leaving my phone in the next room and just like engaging with him and seeing him learn is definitely a mood boost as well. And then just like, I feel really good when I set a boundary and I like hold on to the boundary that I set, because I don't know if it's just me, but I'm someone who would set a boundary and then I'm kind of flimsy with it. So when I stay true to like, no, this is something I can't do. This is way out of my capacity right now. And then I follow through with it. I'm like, okay, like that's growth. And I can actually like see and view my growth. And I used to do this, but I haven't done it in a long time. But each day I would write down 5 to 10 things that made me smile or just made me happy. And it can be something like I saw a cute dog, or, you know, I saw someone smile, and those things are cool because when you're having a bad day, you can reflect on all of the pages of good little moments that you've had and experienced. And sometimes that can brighten up your day and also see your progress with growth.
I love that. So not just gratitude journaling in the moment, but using it as something you can come back to as well and remind yourself of happier, experiences. I love that. Amanda, I remember something we talked about as well, particularly during pandemic times. There's a lot of stress is coming from the fact that you can't make plans. I wish, I could show you my to-do list and all the planning I do every day. And with the, travel's not possible, you can't plan the way that you used to. And I remember you gave me some tips about how to kind of turn that on its head to become a coping mechanism.
Yeah, a lot of us really deal with our anxiety and work through our stress by being able to plan. So it's been really hard, I think, for a lot of people to not be able to plan, not be able to imagine what's going to happen next month, a few months from now. It's really overwhelming for us. So I really am a big fan of focusing on what you can control. A lot of times for myself, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed and feeling like my normal coping skills aren't working, I'll split a piece of paper down the middle and write a list of things I can control and a list of things that are out of my control, and really try to focus on like, what can I do today? What can I do today to take care of myself? What small plan could I make for this weekend? And trying to just, we can't really plan what's going to happen in the next few weeks or months, and trying not to get focused on that and really stay in the moment, because especially when our anxiety is really, really high, breaking things down into small moments, hour by hour, day by day, is really one of the best things we can do for our mental health.
Or to Elise's point, which plans you can cancel.
Yes.
Really, no better feeling. I'm right there with you. Great. So I do want to get to a couple questions that we've gotten from the audience. A reminder, if you all have additional questions, please check them into the Q&A. We have about 10 more minutes to go through them. So one, I think probably Amanda, you're the best person to answer this, but I'd love everyone's thoughts. So we've talked about therapy, we've talked about breath work and other tools you can use. And then a major tool that we haven't talked about for many people is medication. Is a very important part of dealing with depression, anxiety, and mental health for some people. So this person wants to know, how do you know it's time to seek medication? How do you have a conversation like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I really am a big believer in working through medication stigma. I think that you don't have to choose between, somatic, more alternative healing or meds. There can really be a place for both. And sometimes medication is really what someone needs. And it really is one tool that can really make a difference. So in terms of how do you know, there's not really one kind of answer I can give, but my recommendation would definitely be to see a professional, because, you're going to have to see a professional to have you write the prescription. I'm a really big fan of nurse practitioner psychiatrists. They tend to be a little bit less expensive, and they also tend to have more time and meet with you. That's who I typically refer to in my practice. But if you meet with a therapist who's licensed can also give you a better sense of if medication is something that you need. And then if you talk to a therapist, you could talk to your even your GP, your general practitioner, and depending on the medication, that may be something that they feel comfortable prescribing as well.
Great. And I think you're so right. There's a stigma surrounding medication for mental health that needs to be addressed as well. I think particularly kind of in these wellness circles.
Yeah.
But you can't meditate away your clinical depression.
Yeah.
So.
And you can do both.
Yeah, totally.
You take your antidepressant, and it'll probably actually make meditating easier and more effective.
I just had a note for accessibility. So we've had community members who need, therapy and may not have access to insurance. There are different universities, if you Google, that have, a set free number of sessions that someone can attend in the community, your state health departments, Googling and making sure that, if there are any accessible programs in that way, like there are resources out there. You just have to do more digging. If you don't have traditional access to insurance or, seeing a therapist or a nurse practitioner, or don't have the funds for it. So you may have to do some digging, but it's possible. There are resources. Yeah.
And to what Jasmine Marie said too, you can find practices that have interns that are like in grad school that can offer sliding scale spots. A lot of times you can always ask for sliding scale. A lot of practices do offer them, even if they're not like, explicitly written. And I really love, there's an organization called Open Path Collective. I can drop it in the bottom. And they set up therapists that are licensed that are building out their practices with people that don't have health insurance, and give them like guaranteed sliding scale slots too.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure if you could share that info, that'd be great for everyone. We have another question about peer support groups. The question is just, what do you think about them? But, to expand on that a little bit, how do you find one? I don't know if you guys have thoughts on when is a good time to find a peer support group. Elise, do you want to speak to that?
I think that if you're at a point where you feel like you can't speak to people who are readily available to you about what you're experiencing, and I know just from being a woman of color, being a Caribbean woman of color, it was not a conversation that was had ever, let alone like once in a while. So I sought out and started having conversations with different friends and things like that. Before then, Instagram was still big, but there weren't as many platforms and pages in that way. And I think it's so beautiful now that you can attend sessions like this and find these communities and find these support groups and these mini communities under the umbrella of like Instagram and even still Tumblr and Twitter and things like that, where you can find people who are going through similar things. And I think that is something that really, really helped me remove the stigma and help me feel a bit more normal. It was like, okay, this person is like still striving and thriving, but they have depression, or this person has really, really high anxiety or trauma, and they can still do their job and they do it in such an effective way. It doesn't, like their illness doesn't define them. You know what I mean? So I think that if you're in the space where you feel like I have no one to speak to, then it's time to reach out. Like it's absolutely time to reach out. Do it in a way that works with you best, of course, but do not experience these feelings alone.
Great. Does anyone else want to speak to finding kind of a peer network?
I can just say that I think too, peer support can be really helpful, or group support can be really helpful if you're struggling to identify your feelings like by yourself. If like the idea of going and sitting with one person feels really daunting to you, being able to be with other people who are kind of going through what you're going through and you can hear their perspective, you may be able to get words to understand your experience more deeply. And that I think is one of the best things about peer support or groups in general.
Fantastic. And one more question I'd love everyone's thoughts on is this person who's remaining anonymous says, I have horrible anxiety and it's followed by depression, and it creates a cycle, which then affects my ability to get work done. I know that's a feeling I can definitely relate to. And then I imagine the fact that you can't get work done adds to your anxiety, and it's just this vicious cycle. So the question here is, to what extent can you have these open conversations in the workplace? And if you have any tips for kind of broaching the topic with your boss or with your colleagues at work. This is a little bit of a tangential question, but I feel like you all have thoughts.
I actually experienced this at my first and only job I've had. And what worked was I wasn't 1000% open. I was just saying I'm experiencing some kind of health issues. And in the beginning, I asked for kind of personal days, but obviously in your personal days, you kind of just sit in your feelings. But what helped me is when I came back and got a really great response from my bosses was that I had a plan, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I feel like is a little bit too much on my plate right now. And this is how much I can accomplish effectively. And it was the same amount of work, but it was just kind of, worked out in different ways on a different schedule than the normal 9 to 5. And as long as I produce results, at the end of the day, my company was happy. So I would say create a plan. What can you do? What can you still have on your plate if you need more support, if you need more assistance? Please share that with your boss, because they want you to do your best, because essentially that helps the company grow. So create a plan, sit down, think about it. What's too much? What can you take on? What do you really enjoy about the job? And create just a 3-month plan. This is what I want to do in the next 3 months. Please let me know, provide any feedback, and, kind of have that, I want to say negotiation. It sounds so dark, but kind of have that dialogue where you're sharing what's happening. So then your boss also knows that if you can't produce, then you will come to them. They don't have to wonder. I don't know if that's the best advice, but that is something that has worked for me personally.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you probably do. I don't know what kind of work the question asker does. I do think there probably needs to be some sort of an awareness of your company's policies in this regard as well. But I think that's a great idea, kind of proactively coming with, here's some solutions that can help me as I help the company as well.
I think also a lot of times those of us that have the cycles of depression and anxiety often go through, we may be a lot more motivated during anxiety, and we may really struggle to get work done during those depressive times. And I think one of the biggest things that I talk about when people are going through those dips and cycles is trying to balance it out. So a lot of times, actually, if we're experiencing anxiety and depression, anxiety is really exhausting on your body. Your heart rate is increased, your breath is increased, your body is maybe shaking, you're maybe drinking too much coffee, you're not sleeping. And depression, sometimes that follows after, is a way for your body to literally rest and recoup. It's like a body response. So if we can work on maybe what the trap is, people start to think, well, I have this energy and I'm going to have depression, so I may as well just pound it out. But we actually have to lower and do more self-care during the anxiety, so it's not as drastic. So trying to actually slow down sometimes during those anxious points so that the depression isn't as low, and we can actually balance out the productivity the whole time.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about that before. I'm having a light bulb moment. But no, that's so amazing. And we're right at 6 o'clock, but Jasmine Marie, if you don't mind, considering what Amanda just said, I'd kind of like to put you on the spot, which is, in those super anxious moments, is there a beginner level breath work exercise that you think people can do to give themselves a calm down moment?
Yeah. So, and depending on where you're feeling it in your body, I love one of the breathing patterns I really love. It's incorporating that audible sigh. So it's an inhale through the mouth, exhale with a sigh, or a scream, or whatever feels good in the moment. But just audibly, whatever frustration is coming up for you, even around anxiety, let's address that. I'm frustrated because I'm feeling this thing. Okay, let's get it out. Just working with whatever is coming up for you, and that data that's showing up is a great way to handle that.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, we did it, folks. 6:01. Thank you so much, Jasmine Marie, Elise, and Amanda, for sharing your time and brilliance with us this evening. And thank you all of our attendees that tuned in. And I'll see you all on the internet.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all. Have a good one.